Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from a beautiful, we're getting that Indian summer. Again, I think I said that before. I'm not sure if we were meant to say Indian summer anymore. But in any case, we are feeling an extended summer here on the East Coast. It is 80 degrees today, folks. And if I tell you how blessed I feel, because as you all know, I was a little bit trapped, so to speak, in raining season. So having this extended time to enjoy the sun and the fun and the warmth of the US summer has been just wonderful. And so I think my guest knows a little bit about what I'm talking about because she has lived that life in a time before. And so let's get to her bio. She is a visionary educational leader and the founder and CEO of Roundtrip Ticket Home, an organization dedicated to helping educators reimagine school systems through design thinking. Most recently, she served as the head of the NYC Campus for the Winchendon School, where she led an innovative educational oasis in Manhattan, guiding high school students through real-world learning and a unique citywide field study program designed to connect them with their passions. With almost 30 years of experience in education, her journey began as a Peace Corps volunteer teaching chemistry in East Africa. Her career has spanned 5 countries, enriching her global perspective on learning and bringing deep understanding of urban educational landscapes to her transformative work. Kalimah Fergus Ayele, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
And I'll add, folks, that this is doubly exciting because she too is another one of our chocolate cardinal guests. She is also an alumni of Stanford University. And we recently ran into each other at what is called Stanford has a new president who is now of our generation. Can you imagine going to a school where now your president is of your generation, which is inevitable, but he was there when we were there. So that's so interesting. And it was called Open Minds. And I do really appreciate what Stanford does for the alumni. I'm not to down NYU at all, but I definitely feel more a part of an alumni community based on my Stanford experience. And it could be that that's a undergrad versus graduate school relationship, but that is the case. So happily, we saw each other recently and we connected, and here we are. So let's get started. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Well, yes, I would definitely consider myself to be a child of the African diaspora. I was born in Brooklyn, in central Brooklyn in Crown Heights, actually. Then ended up being raised for part of my childhood in the Caribbean in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. So that's where I started school. And then, returned to Brooklyn, but, as you know, went to the West Coast for undergrad and then spent my early adult years in Tanzania as a Peace Corps volunteer. And subsequently, about half of my teaching career as an international school teacher in Africa, in South Africa, in Lesotho, and in Cairo. So I definitely see myself as being connected in so many ways to the African diaspora and consider myself really to be a global citizen. I have reached the 50 by 50, I say, right? 50 countries by 50 years old. But Brooklyn is still home, right? I think there's something about Brooklyn that kind of gets under the skin. And so it's really a big part of my identity. So I'll say that I am a Brooklyn girl.
Okay. And what would you describe as your craft?
So I would say my craft is creating spaces for community, connection, and creativity. That's really the best way I would describe it. I've definitely been even more excited recently about the opportunity to engage people in conversations around what it looks like to design systems and communities or work or life with intention, because I do see more people, sort of wanting to take their power back, right? Sort of recognizing that a lot of these toxic systems are really not designed with their well-being in mind. And so what are the ways in which we can sort of take ownership for the way our life unfolds. And I think a lot of that is it's possible. It's possible using
Right.
design thinking tools. And so really wanting to bring that with intentionality to as many people as possible.
Sure. So for us that don't know what design thinking is, give us a little one-on-one.
Yes,
What
of
is design thinking?
course. So design thinking is a process of innovation, which really is, I would describe it as being human-centered. So the idea is you start with acknowledging a challenge by being in a place of empathy. So really putting yourself
Mm.
in the position of what is the experience of the human at the center of that particular challenge that you want to solve or problem or what have you. And so empathy becomes actually at the root of how design thinking works. And then from there, what I find really exciting is you have an opportunity to be imaginative. And that's the ideation stage where you really are saying, what's possible? And opening yourself up to anything that's possible. And then finally, you get to just be experimentative and innovative and, sort of go through prototyping and testing. And it really keeps you in that space of curiosity and creativity. And so, sort of as an easy example, if you think about something like eyeglasses, right? Like we all assume that if you have a problem with vision, there's something that you should use where there are lenses that will go in front of your eyes and there'll be something that goes over your ears to hold them in place. But that's just one design. Think of how many other ways could have been developed to solve that same problem. And so I'm just giving that as an example because I think there's so many things that we just take for granted because that's the way that we've always solved that problem. But if we gave ourselves some opportunity to really open up what's possible, we might find that there are so many other solutions. So I
Right,
hope that was
right.
helpful.
Yeah, and that's a great example because I find myself design thinking all the time. Like that
Yeah,
is, and it might be that and that scientist in me and that background that puts
exactly.
me in that place. And so I'm curious to find out for you, how did you kind of decide to go down that path of really using that as a tool for your work?
Well, it's so interesting, right? I kind of came across design thinking when I was overseas. And, similar to you, right? I had a very, my background is in STEM. I know you were engineering at Stanford. I started off as engineering, but ended up shifting to pure science and chemistry. And so I really found myself saying there's so many of those elements that I was drawn to, like you said, the experimentation aspect, the curiosity aspect, the ongoing process of like questioning. It kind of goes in a cyclical pattern. And so I ended up doing a design thinking course through the American University of Cairo. And it was a
Mm. Hmm.
2-day session. And I was just blown away, right? Just the way that they were able to what I call combine the right and left sides of the brain. That was really exciting to me as well. And so it really just sort of opened me up to how could this be used in education? Because that was the thing. I think a lot of folks think of design thinking in other contexts, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
business
business
typically.
development,
Hmm.
exactly, product design. And
Yeah.
so my wheels just started turning and I said, this is definitely something that is applicable, mostly just because we've known that our systems in education are outdated, right? And we know that there are things that need to shift. And we also know why it's hard to change, right? It's a system where there's so many stakeholders. There's a lot of fear. So from multiple sides, there's a lot of rigidity, but there's ways that you can use it, even in small ways where you just think about certain cultural elements. Like what could you do with your lunch, practices or protocols just to be more imaginative about the way students interact and engage with one another. So these are all
Hmm.
things and I also want to say that I do feel that we're still in that sort of post-COVID moment, right? Where we don't have to go back to everything that we did pre-COVID. We still have an opportunity and a window of time to continue to imagine ways that we want to show up in the world. And obviously with things changing so quickly with technology, we don't have a choice. We
Right.
have to be able to adapt.
Yep. Yeah, that
Yeah.
part. Exactly.
It's happening. Ready or not.
Exactly. So thinking about adaptation, I want to ask you why the where. So how did you come to be living, working, and playing? And I usually say where you currently are, but tell us about that story of you deciding on the Peace Corps and then your tour for this round trip ticket back.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I do think, oh, why the where? I know that, as a young person, as a child, even in Brooklyn, I guess you could say that I was connected to what most would be described as, for lack of a better phrase, an Afrocentric community. So I was always going to the African Street Fair, which I know now is called the International African Arts Festival. And so I was always in those spaces and around that energy. And so there was like, for me, this kind of, well, of course I've got to go to Africa. Like that was like, duh, it was kind of one of those things for me where it was like, when's the soonest I could go? Oh, I got to wait till I get this degree. Okay, fine. And so that's kind of how Peace Corps came about. It was just one of the easiest ways for me to get to the continent. And then even when I returned, there was still this feeling of like, but I love it there. Like, I love living there. I really wanted my own children. My children were born also in Brooklyn, but we ended up moving back overseas when they were 1 and 4 years old. So I really did also want them to have that exposure to the continent because I really wanted them to really know what Africa really is, right? I think there are so many myths and narratives that we are somehow enthralled in here in the US that just aren't true and aren't even close to truth. And so I just wanted some experiential knowledge for my kids to have really from the early onset. And so that was the where I did end up returning to the US right before the pandemic. And I'll say, I don't think I'm alone because I know so many other people who just found themselves being sent home for some reflection time during the pandemic for various reasons. I think that was one of the things that happened for me was that there was some unfinished business. I'll say some of it was a grief journey. Some of it has just been a very intense healing practice. And I do think I needed to be here at home for that to happen. And then just more specifically, I'm currently situated in the Lower Hudson Valley, I think it's called. I get a little thrown off by the names here, but I'm close to the Hudson. I love it here. I just find it to be so magical. I ended up actually moving to Sleepy Hollow of all places.
We're on the eve of Halloween, I think. Oh, no, not
Exactly.
yet,
Well,
not yet. But
no,
Halloween season is starting.
if your Sleepy Hollow is already started, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna let you know it's already here. I have never been a fan of Halloween. I'll say that. Part of it is just like I'm too much of a scaredy cat, call it my own
Right.
general anxiety or hypervigilance, being a Black woman in America, whatever you want to call it. I was like, I do not need to pay to be scared. But I do think that living in Sleepy Hollow has given me a special appreciation for the power of spell casting, right? And sort of what that looks
Mm.
like. And I think about just my own larger journey of
Mhm.
studying and teaching chemistry and how that's related to alchemy and all the myths about
Yeah.
what that means. And so it's really, yeah, I want to say, yeah, there's something, some other parts of me that have kind of come online from living in that part of the world that makes things a little bit interesting for me as well. But I definitely just love being up here. I when I started the job in Midtown, I just needed more nature. Brooklyn is pretty grounded to me I guess because it's home, but I think it's just a more, I don't know, it's just a different energy. But
Yeah.
Manhattan I was just like, this energy is too much.
Yeah.
And I say there is a power to drip advertising. I kept seeing that poster when I was walking in and out of the subway. It showed folks on the water walking. It said only 40 minutes away. I said, okay. It was about 6 weeks before my bags were packed.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
You're serious.
I'm serious. I was like, it worked. It worked. So yeah. So
Yeah.
I've been up here now for 2 years and I love
Okay.
it.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So I'm curious, because you brought chemistry up and the alchemy of things, I'll let everyone in on a hopefully not too long a big secret is I'm working on this concept for a Pan-African Creative Trust Fund. And that's to create
Mm.
content that would then be utilized in what I'm calling PALACE, which are Pan-African Learning Acceleration Centers of Excellence. So palaceeducation.org. The idea around this curriculum is to found it in physics because first principles and then anthropology. So now thinking from a STEM perspective, if you were to imagine how you would redesign curricula
Mm.
for let's say early learners or wherever your sweetest spot of teaching was, how would you ground that curriculum, incorporating some of your design thinking and all those things? And I hate to put you on the spot, but I think you
Oh
probably have thought
yeah,
about this a little bit.
definitely. Of
Yeah.
course, definitely. I mean, and as you can imagine, right? I've just been in so many different contexts for young learners, and we know, right? We know that young learners need play and imagination needs to be central to their development. Like that's without question, right? And so as far as I can assume, many of your listeners will be familiar with some of the principles, let's say, of Montessori, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
foundational. So I'm just using that because I think people are familiar with that. But I really do think that's something that really reflects that ethos is so valuable for young people really starting off with a fundamental understanding that they have something unique that they need to uncover and discover about themselves. So the whole idea has always been for me, and I know it's a quote, but I would say that this is where most of my educational practice has been rooted. But this idea of a mind is not this empty vessel to be filled, it's a flame to be fanned. And so, how do we actually just bring that out of young people and get them to see from the very beginning? I think it's also the same. I've never worked at a Quaker school, but I really have worked with a lot of leaders of Quaker schools and some of those principles of just how do we just create space for people to actually be in silence so that they can just be with their own light and their own energy and just being in spaces where those elements were incorporated, even in small moments, right? Like I started doing that as a classroom teacher where I would just have the students take turns to just say, let's just lead the rest of your classmates in a 2 minutes of mindfulness. And that could look like anything. It just looked like silence. Some of them wanted to do box breathing or lead their fellow classmates through a guided moment of reflection. But I think they have to be the ones who lead that practice for themselves and each other so that they know that that's just a part of how we are as human beings, that we're not meant to be rushing and doing all the time and running from one bell signal to the next. So having that be at the foundation, I think would be critical.
The self. I got it. Makes perfect
Yes.
sense. Yeah, at any
Yes.
level, right?
At
Yeah.
any level, at any
Yeah.
level.
Yeah,
Mhm.
indeed. And so that kind of leads me to ask more about your work at the Winchendon School, because that was something that was highly
Yes.
innovative as well. So tell us about that program, that
Definitely,
process.
definitely. So I should say that right now I'm actually in the moment of a career transition, right? I had
Mm-hmm.
that remarkable opportunity to lead an innovative high school in Midtown Manhattan. And that really was a dream come true, right? We were able to say the city is our classroom. And what would it look like if we gave students an opportunity to have experiences around the city that let them explore what they enjoyed and really get to reconnect with who they are. And so being able to work with dedicated faculty, a creative and talented team, and see that real impact on young people, right? On adolescents, many of whom were actually just searching for like a caring, close-knit school community where they could show up as their full selves.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, the program closed unexpectedly. So I'm actually still leaning on the tools that I developed in those ways of using design thinking to imagine what schools can look like, and really supporting other schools and school leaders to help them design systems and cultures that will suit their students' needs as well.
Sure. So thinking about that as an educational platform and paradigm, what are you seeing in the market in terms of people's thoughts on innovation and education at this moment in the time?
I mean, I'll just have to come out and say it because I think it's okay to name. Most people are just overwhelmed and distracted at the moment, right? Like there's just
Mm.
so much noise. And
Mhm.
I do say that, most people are just overwhelmed by the amount of noise. And it's really hard, I think, for most of us, I'll include myself, to kind of tune it out long enough to get clear about what we need to focus on. So one of the things that I try to just center myself with is this idea of like, okay, I'm team human, right? And I almost feel like
Mm.
you kind of need to
Yes,
say
yes,
it.
yes,
I'm team
exactly. Say
human.
it.
A
Mhm.
line has been drawn in the sand. Choose a
Hmm.
side. And then we have a real opportunity to center our humanity in the work that we do and in the way that we show up in the world. And so I think if we can just get to the point where it doesn't have to be that. It could be whatever your grounding statement or declaration is. But if you can just ask yourself in any given moment, is what I'm doing or focusing on bringing me closer to that, right? Like, how does this help serve humanity if that's your thing? Or how is this helping to serve the planet if that's your thing? And if it's not, try to stop doing it. Like, if it's not, you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah,
like pick a
yeah.
lane, sort of like put the blinders on and get to it because there's plenty of work to do. And we really don't necessarily have the time to be too caught up in who is and who's not doing what they're supposed to do because we each have something that we're supposed to be doing. And so I do think that that's a big part of it is just trying to like continually get everybody to be like, just stay focused. Stay focused.
Right, right. And so you've had experience at all levels of the service of providing education. So as an educator, as an administrator, as a leader, right? And so when you think about that work of in your specific roles and particularly as a leader and operationally, right? Because there's the
Mm.
operational aspects. When you think about that part of the business of the work and how you get people to be a part of the vision, particularly educators, when it is something that is a bit innovative, what are some of the tools or techniques, or what are some of the challenges that you faced in bringing staff into this? Because there obviously curriculum isn't necessarily doing that job.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is a mindset shift, right? And one of the things that I have really been, committed to and really infusing in the work that I'm doing is making sure that that's at the forefront of the conversation because it's not that we don't know what needs to happen. So one of the things that I kind of and I want to say I borrowed a little bit of this framework from some work that Glenn Singleton does with Courageous Conversations, because he kind of has this framework where there's a protocol where you think about these quadrants. And so on the one hand, you would say there's a knowledge piece, right? Like, do you have the information? We got the information. The information is not the problem. And then there's another part where you say, okay, do we have the interest or the desire? Do we want these things to change? Do we want this element? I also believe that's there too, where I think there's a struggle. There's also a part about skills, which you can build, which is part of it. There's skills and then there's capacity. Where I think our challenge is the capacity. Most of us are challenged because we don't have the capacity for change. And whether we are ready, it's already here, it's coming, it's only going to intensify. And so, whatever that looks like, people might want to begin to think about how can I increase my capacity? It's so interesting because I follow this woman on social media who talks about capacity building, and she's doing a lot of work around that, which is really phenomenal. But I also just think about the fact that a lot of people just need to practice self awareness. Like, emotional self-awareness. I know people talk about EQ all the time, but I still don't see people like doing the work. Are you actually checking in with yourself? What feelings are coming up for you right now? Why are they coming up? What are the underlying beliefs that you have? Are you addressing your own internalized, whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it, oppressive mindsets, be it perfectionism or, binary thinking? Like, there are specific things that we actually need to be working on. And the interesting thing about this process is it doesn't matter how you almost like just, you could figure it out from any area of life, right? Like, whatever that challenge is showing up somewhere in your life, and it doesn't matter which area you choose. If it's showing up in your relationships, if it's showing up in your health, if it's showing up in your work, you just got to choose one area and then start growing your capacity in that area. And that's really where I think people are most challenged, is because it's so much easier not to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. That's basically it.
It's basically it. It's so much easier to play, be the victim. Listen, I do it too. Be the victim, point the finger at somebody else. That person's the problem. And really not take the opportunity to look deeply at, what those areas are that you really need to do the work in.
Mm-hmm.
It is not easy, but the tools are here. And that's the thing. I feel like, and again, I don't know, every generation thinks something different. Like, for our generation, I don't think there's ever been more access to a variety of healing tools and technology.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Now that the research is coming out about, and again, I'm not promoting anything, but there's research out about the use of psychedelics. There's research out about yoga. There's research, you know what I mean? Like, all of these things that maybe people would consider like fringe or nobody really knew. And now it's like, no, the evidence, now it's evidence-based. And so really, I'm a big proponent of people just like locking in and getting really serious about doing the work.
Right. So that leads me to ask you about your mindset hack. So how do you hack your mindset?
Yes. Oh my gosh. And can I tell you, it's all the time. I mean, one of the things, like I was just saying, really, for me, that idea of like being clear about what my values are. And I'm sure people say this all the time, but I can't say it enough. That early morning when you first wake up, what are you doing in that first hour? I'm probably not as good about what happens at the end of the day. Like, yes, I'm on Netflix at night. I'll just say it. But in the morning, I think just having a real dedicated practice, for me, that involves journaling and prayer and meditation, like really tapping in and having some dedicated time in the morning. And that was something that I would say came out of the pandemic, right? Because not having to commute to work, I was able to really have some flexibility with morning time. And then it was almost like once it was time to go back into a physical environment, it was kind of like, ooh, I don't know what I could get rid of, because
I can imagine.
I need all of this. Like, do I cut out the smoothie? Do I cut out, like, what do I? I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
I don't know what I do, Right. So really just experimenting with something, even if you say, I'm just going to try this for 30 days or, whatever, 6 weeks or whatever your rhythm is, right? Whatever that is, just try it out and see how your life responds to it. Because I do think again, that word alchemy, right? I do think there's definitely some things that it's a little bit of magic that happens.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the road, right? And we want to hear what you heard in your travels around Africa. And so this is where we want to know about your Glocal speak. So a word or a phrase or a saying that was a meaningful part of your local experience in any of the countries you lived in, and why or how you came to value it as Glocal speak.
Yeah, with my family, because I had that earlier experience as an adult in East Africa. But then with my family being in Southern Africa, I feel like that word Ubuntu was one that really, really stayed, right? It
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
stuck. And this concept of, I am because we are. And I struggle to think if we have anything equivalent to that concept
In
in
English.
our America, yeah, even in our
Yeah.
cultural landscape.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I think we know to be true, particularly after the pandemic and the light lockdown and the isolation, is that there isn't anyone who questions the importance of community and connection now. Like we know it, like
Mm-hmm.
viscerally, we know it.
Mm-hmm.
So we no longer have to debate. I remember feeling like the oddball talking about community and connection, and people were like, "What you talking about? We don't need to worry about that. Just, reading, writing, and arithmetic. What is she
Right.
all about?" And then you sort of fast forward, and now there's no question.
Yeah.
Nobody argues. All of a sudden, everybody's on board. I'm like, oh, okay. Now people are listening. But unfortunately, that's what it took, right? It took that level of pain and the fallout. And my whole thing is it's not a lesson that we need to repeat. We get it now, right? And so now we just need to work on tools and building the capacity. Because honestly, a lot of people, and I speak for myself too, we just forgot how to be together. Like we were just like in
Mm.
our own energy, which is a gift, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
look at what it means. It means that you get on the subway and people don't know how to move into the middle, right? Like move into the middle, and folks are like, "What?" So
Oh, right.
there's
Yeah.
almost this like lack of, and people say some of it the pandemic, but some of it is social media as well, right? Where people aren't actually all there, right? They're not
Yeah.
present
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
like on the phone and they're sort of checked out. So there's a combination of those two things that we're sort of pushing against, where it's like, okay, we are starting from almost from scratch, right? It's like, how do you be present? How do you actually be connected to your own body, your own system? So you kind of got to put the technology down for a minute, and whatever that looks like, right? You hear people saying they'll have their gatherings with friends and everybody's got to put their phone in the bowl or whatever the thing is. But really being intentional about engaging with one another and being present for one another so that we don't lose it. I think it's like a use it or lose it situation when it comes to connecting. And I do think that it's something that we need to put more effort in. Before we didn't have to, there was sort of like these natural ways of moving in the world that you would just learn. But now one of the small observations was I feel like when, throughout my life, I've always known that when you're in a group of people who are connecting and communicating, there will be moments where there'll just be an energy lull, right? Well, nobody will say anything for a minute. There's a bit of awkwardness, and then the conversation will flow again. And what I'm noticing is that for our younger generation, they have an escape valve. For when the things are awkward, they've got this technology that they can now go to because then they can detach from that discomfort. And
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
easy. But then one of the things that I also observed was sometimes they can internalize it. Like just even that awkward moment, they'll suddenly
Mm.
think, oh, did I
It's
say
their fault.
something
Mm.
weird?
Mm-hmm.
Is everybody, wait, what? And they get into their heads about, so some of the, just some of the practices of just like, okay, why don't we just make sure everybody does community service? Like just bare basics. How do we make sure that the kids sort of get out of their own world, zoom out, right? Show up for somebody else, show up for your community, show up for somebody else in need until you figure out what it is that you have to offer the world. And so, again, I know I'm just giving these random examples, but I'm just using that to highlight the fact that there are certain practices that we just need to bring back. and sort of bring to the forefront of everybody's mind in terms of what it means to be connected and in community with each other.
Yeah. So thinking about your experience in the classroom in Southern Africa, East Africa, and North Africa, and looking at those experiences and thinking about how education was delivered in those contexts, what are some of the different ways that you, or even different ways that it was done there that we could benefit from, and vice versa?
Oh,
Not
wow.
we,
Yeah,
but the
that's a
West
great,
could
yeah, of
benefit from. Yeah.
course. Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because I do think, for me, I can see very clearly how those different experiences, impacted the way I show up in education. And I am often thinking about, okay, so what are the things that we can definitely pass forward? I mean, I definitely value one of the first values I would say is, in the West, and I'll just name it because I think it's important. I think we still have some very narrow ideas about what success means, right? Like, what is it that we would say, what makes for a successful student, or what type of student we think of as being successful in schools. And I think for the most part, that's still fairly narrow. I mean, it's shifting, and it has to, because now we're beginning to see that even our sort of cookie cutter path doesn't work, right? Like, our idea of saying you do this, then you do this, and then this is like guaranteed at the end is it, because that's falling apart. It's like we kind of have to stop. We can't spin the same tale anymore. The jig is up, right? Like, it's not working. So there's that piece, right? Where we're actually getting to this point of, because of all these external changes, we can't keep peddling the same tale. And part of that has to do with technology, right? Because what we're telling students they have to be able to do is adapting faster. Like, before we can say you need to be able to, then AI can do it for you. So then there's that piece. And so for me, it kind of comes back to, so then what we need to teach our students to do is to be in community and connection with one another so that they can continually learn and grow. And for learning and growing, this is the hardest part. Some of that involves unlearning. And for many people, that's the part that creates the most resistance, because when you think about how much it needs to take for you to actually change your mind about something. And what was helpful was when somebody, and I don't remember the book, but there is a book about this, but it kind of explains how, for the way the human mind works, is we're wired for survival, not only our own survival, but the survival of whatever we perceive to be our offspring or our future generations, our legacy, right? So that means different things to different people. It means that if you have children, you want them to survive, right? That's the sort of the way Mother Nature has designed it, so that you will sacrifice whatever needs to be sacrificed for the next generation to survive. But then it goes further than that, because what this book explains is that it also comes down to ideology as well. And you see your ideas or your world philosophy or your worldview as also being part of your own identity in a way. So the reason why this really helped me to understand a little bit of the emotional charge that people have when they are debating politics or, any other hot topics. And what this book explains is actually because that person feels like their life is at risk, not their mindset is so connected to. So I think that really helped me to understand something, because I'm so used to being in an environment in education where there's this assumption that people are here to learn something new. We're all here for this purpose. So then when I realized, but wait a minute, sometimes learning something new means unlearning something that you already thought was true. And that's usually harder. Like, it's easy to say 2 + 2 is 4 if you didn't know anything before that. But if you already thought 2 + 2 was 5, the moment somebody says 2 + 2 is 4, It's on you. There's a fight. So again, even with teaching something like chemistry, because chemistry is so abstract, I really had to make sure, well, what do you think I meant by, because I
Yeah.
can't see what you're thinking.
Yeah.
So we used to call it, sort of uncovering misconceptions because they already came in thinking something. I'm not starting with a blank slate. You're right. You're 15 years old.
Right.
you
right.
already
Yeah.
think something. So it's really interesting when I think about it from an educational context, what it looks like to actually be in a process of reconstructing knowledge, because people already have ideas about the world. And what happens when the conversation comes in conflict with that prior knowledge? And what does that mean? And, it's very interesting because I remember, I'll say this because I do think it's a good context to even bring this up. I do remember that having been, again, between the US and the Caribbean, sub-Saharan Africa, even parts of Asia, I'll say it like this. There was a little bit of me thinking that, oh, there are certain values that are just, I would say, common. I thought they were common human values. I thought that there were certain things that we all had in common. And I'll name a few. I really was so used to this idea of respect for elders. Just fundamental. I thought that was just a fundamental human value. I thought everybody in the world was like, listen, if you're an elder, even if I don't agree with you, I'm not going to say anything right to your face. You know what I mean?
Right.
I just gonna, whatever, hold that line. And so it really wasn't until I was in the Middle East. And again, it's not to disparage, the culture there is beautiful. The hearts are so open. But there were so many things that were so fundamentally different about the way my students viewed the world that I finally understood what it was like to be an educator in a context where you didn't see the world the same way your students did.
Right.
I just hadn't had that experience before.
Yeah.
I knew where the students in Brooklyn were coming from. I knew where my students from the Caribbean, or even from sub-Saharan Africa. Fundamentally, there was something that I understood. And then all of a sudden, I was in a context where I was like, oh, wait a minute. We just don't have the same worldview.
Yes.
And what does that look like? How do we accept one another even when we don't see the world the same way? And I learned so much from that experience. That experience grew me tremendously. And again, I would say it was just one of the things, again, I don't, my Egyptian people, my heart. The best scene I would say is the one from Malcolm X where Spike Lee videotapes him walking down the street and everybody's like, Malcolm, welcome. I mean, that's the energy, right, of Cairo. Absolutely insane and open-hearted people. Total host culture. But you tell them hard work leads to success, they will laugh right in your face. They'll be like, not here. It's who you know, who you're connected to, and how sweet you can talk somebody out of that. Like that hustle, like that's gold to them.
Yeah.
If something's worth $5 and I can sell it to you for $200,
yeah.
and meanwhile I'm like, no, you gotta study hard and they're like, mm-mm. So there are just certain things that's what I mean by saying, like, at a certain point, just putting myself in a context, in a culture that was so different, that allowed me to see, right? Because sometimes you just don't even see it, right? It's the idea of like, the fish in the water, right? How's the water? What water? I didn't even see that. I had certain sort of morality codes, right? Because we still have that myth of meritocracy. I call it a myth because we know it ain't real.
Yes.
That myth of meritocracy that I was carrying with me, knowing full well, right, as a Black American, that hard work does not equal success here either.
Right.
But I'm still peddling that, right? I'm still walking around with that, like, hey, this is what I'm going to pass on. And I had to look in the mirror and be like, yeah, it ain't true where I'm from either.
Right. Yes.
But I couldn't see it until I was in a context where it was like people were honest about it. Because they were just like, no, miss, that's not true.
Right.
And I was like, it's not? Like, you hear me?
Yeah.
And you just have to sit with that and then reflect on it and be like, yeah, you're right. It's not true.
I think one of the key things to take away from that is checking our arrogance at the airport. Right? And I love that you said and I hope that we will actually start to get to a place where there are common humanity values, because that's where we come together. And that's a lot of the mindset that I'm looking to establish as this kind of Pan-African concept of really how do we get to, because I recognize that myself just in communicating, is that even my choice of words in English, thinking that I'm speaking to someone who understands English, things are always lost in translation.
Yeah.
So the cultural translation and transnavigation is so key to really empowering all of us in our global citizenship, right? And figuring out how to be that global person as well. So thank you for that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, no, that was.
So question for you, what's new and next? What's new and next? Where do you see yourself in the next year, in the next 3 to 5 years? What's new and next?
Well, I can only speak for, I know now I'm like, things are changing so quickly. So right now, I'm about to go on a little adventure, a little travel adventure.
I love it.
Yes. So I've got some conferences I'm presenting at coming up over the next year, but I've also got some real travel plans. So again, being flexible and adaptive, but right now it's mostly Asia. I've got India on the docket. I've got Vietnam and Japan.
Okay.
Those are pretty firm. And then there might be Singapore and Cambodia as well. I'm just not sure about those.
Okay.
But yes, that's what's coming up for me, is an opportunity to see more of the world, do a little bit of the gypsy life.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm not mad.
Yes, definitely having that moment of just trying to get my ducks in a row at the moment. So, but yeah, I'm excited. I call it scared-sided. I'm
scared-sided.
Scared,
oh, I know, right? I know. And, we have to name it, because it's doing something different is inherently has that kind of anxiety potentially. But scared-sided, I love that. That's a great word.
Yeah.
So aside from the work and thinking about work, who is Kalimah when she's not working and thinking and being an educator? Are you a reader, a watcher, a listener, or what are some of your favorite other activities that you do besides traveling on your leisure time?
Well, yeah, I mean, really, really kicking up my writing practice. Okay. So doing and then sharing publicly. So I'm trying to do both, continue with my own writing, but also sharing the practice of sharing my writing with others. And so I have a newsletter, weekly offering, I guess I would call it, that, if anybody's wanting to see what I'm up to. I'm also stepping up with just being on social media and just what does that feel like to just kind of share my experiences with the world in that way. So yeah, really just experimenting with how I offer my experience publicly, but then also spending a lot of time reading and writing as well. So I actually just finished Elizabeth Gilbert's All the Way to the River.
Okay.
Oh, child. I just put a warning on that one.
Okay.
But so glad I did. So glad I did.
And so you mentioned Netflix. What's catching your eyes on Netflix? I had to ask.
Embarrassing. I know, right? So I will say this, and maybe it was just the timing of it that it came out right before I read the book. So I ended up watching that AKA's Charlie Sheen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I kind of get and then, and then reading all the way to, so somehow those experiences are kind of like paired to me.
Yeah.
And then I I have a little bit of a fascination with cults.
Oh,
So
okay. I mean, there's some
I
interesting
watched,
stories about
there's some
those on
interesting
Netflix.
stories. And so I did watch Orgasm Inc.
Oh, okay.
recently.
Oh, that's on Netflix?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard of it,
Yeah.
but it's
Yep. And then most of the time, this is I just fully expose myself to the darker side of what I'm into. Most of the time, I go on there to watch a stand-up comedy. So
okay. I
that's
love
my
that.
that's my default. Like,
Yeah.
again, when I was like all in it and exhausted and just needed to laugh at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
But now that I'm peeking into the shadows, that's what those are the things that have come up for me.
Right.
Addiction and cults. So yeah, there you
Wow.
go. There you go.
Okay. A better understanding of human characters.
That's
Yeah.
it. I'm like, if you're gonna love the human, you got to see all of
Yes, that part.
it.
Wow. Well, Kalimah, this has been so nice. Lovely catching
Oh,
up.
thank you so much for this
Yes.
opportunity.
We
This has
wish you
been
all the
great.
best on your upcoming travels and your
Thank
speeches.
you.
And
Thank
one thing we didn't mention is she has a
you.
book. There is a book.
Yes,
Tell us about your book.
yes. Okay, so this is my 10-year anniversary. So even the name of my business, Roundtrip Ticket Home, is because that's what I named my memoir. So I wrote a short memoir 10 years ago. And yeah, I'm just excited to be able to share at some future moment what's happened in the 10 years
Mhm.
since. Because it's like
Yeah.
that was just the beginning.
Right?
But yes, it is available in digital form on Amazon. And at some point, because a couple people have said to me, especially my fellow Stanford alum, they were like, "We don't have time to read. You got to have an audiobook." So I got to figure out.
Oh.
I'll sort that part out. I'll reach out to
Yeah.
folks who
Yeah.
have done that so I can figure out
Sure.
how to get the audio done.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been lovely. Lovely, lovely.
Yes,
Do you have any
same.
last thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners before we go?
Well, only, all of the things that I said, right? That I really do love, as difficult as this moment is, I really do love the opportunity that we have to really tune out the chaos and be clear about what the work is that we have to offer the world right now. And then just find the people who are, who kind of energy match, right? Like look for
Yes.
those
That
folks
alchemy.
so that you
Mhm.
can really just keep going and just one of one of the people I follow, because there are a couple people that I like to follow as well, who say we have got to make revolution irresistible. And I love that.
Yes.
I was like, yes. So the more
Yeah.
we can jump up and down, tap into whatever. I mean, I know everybody has their own ancestral wisdom, but I feel like, mine was joy. So it's like tap into that joy
Mm.
and movement or whatever it is that can keep you in that, and then just make revolution irresistible.
I love it. I love it. I like to say that evolution is inevitable. So let's move there
Oh,
too. So it's all
yes.
about movement, folks. Let's be in our next
Exactly.
space with our heads held high. All right, Glocal citizens, this has been another episode of the podcast. You can catch us with new episodes Tuesdays at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcast. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. We love to hear from you. And check out the show notes because you can find out all things Kalimah and all things all guests on the website. So until next time, bye for now.